Hi, everybody. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Leanne Gordon, and I'm with the Manage Engine team. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you're all keeping well and safe. We're very excited to have with us Charles Betz, our guest speaker for the day from Forrester. He'll be presenting on the new digital workspace, delivering frictionless IT and business services across the enterprise. Charles is Forrester's lead DevOps analyst, serving infrastructure and operations professionals globally. He's also Forrester's lead analyst for enterprise service management topics and the intersection of ITSM or ESM and DevOps. Charles covers industry frameworks like ITIL, IT4IT, TOGAF, COBIT, and industry vertical frameworks. Charles also specializes in the information architecture of the business of IT and can help mediate challenging, hard-to-resolve discussions around how to frame, build, and benefit from application, service, product, asset, and technology portfolios and IT data warehouses. Charles, once again, we appreciate you taking the time to be here today to present this webinar. We look forward to learning from you. At this time, I'd also like to quickly introduce to you our company, Manage Engine. Manage Engine is the enterprise IT management division of Zoho Corporation. We have over a dozen real-time IT management tools from Active Directory management, unified endpoint monitoring tools, network and application monitoring, IT service management, enterprise password management tools, business intelligence software, and more, all in the IT management spectrum. We have offices worldwide, including the United States, the Netherlands, India, Singapore, Japan, China, and Australia, as well as a network of over 200 global partners to help organizations tightly align their businesses and IT. If you're interested in knowing more about Manage Engine, please visit www.manageengine.com. I'd also like to introduce you to Manage Engine's flagship IT service management tool, Service Desk Plus, available as both on-premises and cloud versions. Service Desk Plus is an ITSM suite with all recommended ITSM processes, including IT incident management, problems, changes, IT asset management, the service catalog, the CMDB, built-in reporting and analytics, and so on. The software also includes the advantage of being able to integrate with a lot of Manage Engine's other IT management tools and third-party tools as well. And if you're interested in knowing more about our product, please visit our website www.servicedeskplus.com. Before I transfer the session to Charles, I'd like to take you through a few housekeeping items. All attendee lines are muted by default. If you have any questions during the session, please use the Q&A panel, which you will see on the left side of your screen, and send in your questions. We also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar where we will be answering all your questions, so stay tuned for that. And as always, if you have any feedback or questions, please send them in to hello@servicedeskplus.com. And now to you, Charles.
Thank you for attending my presentation today. And I appreciate Manage Engine's interest in what I have to say here. It's always great to appear with Manage Engine. And today I'm going to talk about the new digital workspace. So the world today is a challenging world. We use the word VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I think that this is a very apt description of the challenges we face. Certainly between pandemic and social unrest, the times are challenging. And especially we see that, particular to today's topic, that massive transformations have occurred and continue to occur in the workforce. We've heard that up to 1 billion people have been affected just in the changes of ways of working. And this is having real effects on the modern enterprise, effects that are directly relevant to enterprise service management. For example, you can no longer walk down to 4th floor and talk to the receptionist. You have to engage with the HR department remotely. And in addition to maybe not knowing who your HR analyst even is, you're also not hearing a lot of the day-to-day critical information that was so essential to operating in complex business environments. You no longer go out with your friends and maybe you're having coffee to discuss a certain topic, but you also discuss several other things that maybe you wouldn't have bothered to meet about. But this is how knowledge is transferred in large organizations. This is how people pick up on culture. This is how people understand this is how we do things. And because of the changes, we now see a need for greater formalization of enterprise service offerings. And all in all, this is because and evidence of an enormous pivot in ways of working as the economy has absorbed shocks, multiple shocks, large economic shocks to sectors like food and entertainment, transportation, logistics, but also large economic opportunities as people have pivoted to new ways of working, as they spend more time in their homes and they seek to improve their homes. All of these have resulted in that famous saying, crisis is opportunity. And ultimately, a very large pivots for many companies in business models, ways of working, enterprise priorities, and a need to continue to experiment as we continue to digitally transform. And I think that Satya Nadella said it very well. And this was a year ago at the end of April, just after 2 months of full-scale pandemic. He said, we've seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months. And this has been important to vendors such as ManageEngine, because one of the ways that this manifests itself is an increasing interest for enterprise service management capabilities. But we need to understand these capabilities in the larger context of how do we keep up with the speed of change. We see that DevOps continues to accelerate as a preferred way of working. Now, notice here, I'm not talking about the technical aspects of DevOps. I'm not talking about continuous integration, continuous delivery, package management, all these things. It's at a higher level, at a business level. DevOps represents the ongoing iterative discovery of customer value, and how value is starts with an idea and then it's elaborated, it's further defined through the efforts of marketing, R&D, and product. From those perspectives, we see the need for quick construction, especially if there's a digital component. We need to quickly get this in front of the customer, deliver it and service it. We need to operate it from an internal perspective. And then the discoveries that we find on the right-hand side need to be quickly fed back into a new discovery loop. And it's the enterprises that do this quickly that succeed. And so all in all, this is the new economy, increasingly based on this fast feedback loop. And we find that the most appropriate organizational form for this fast feedback loop is the product team, cross-functional, and a number of other criteria I'll talk about. This is becoming the primary basis for operating models worldwide. Project teams and PMOs are in decline. Functional specializations are transforming. We took a snapshot of this last year, and while product teams seem to be the minority here, they're very close to project teams, statistically not a relevant difference of 3%. And I firmly believe that if I'd run this survey 10 years ago, we would have seen product teams at more like 10%. And about 8 months after we ran this version of the survey, we were working with a vendor on one of their sponsored surveys, and we injected the same exact question. And the product teams were up around 42% across a very similar survey panel in terms of its composition. And so we definitely see evidence that organizations worldwide are pivoting to these what Hayer calls micro enterprise operating models. there still are some very interesting questions around how we support them. And these are the questions I'll dig into because I think they're highly relevant in the enterprise service management space. But before I do that, let's just talk about some of the values. The product teams are strongly correlated with faster release frequencies and agile and DevOps transformations. When they move to a you build it, you run it mode, organizations that adopt that as a preferred operating model, they are more likely to exceed expectations for their business objectives. Correlation is not causation, of course, but this is an interesting fact. I'm talking about the why, though, and so some of you may very reasonably be asking, well, what? What is a product team? What makes a product team? And for that, I use the Epoch AA model. Product teams are empathetic, persistent, outcome-focused, collaborative, heterogeneous, automated, and relatively autonomous. They're empathetic in that they use techniques like persona analysis and customer journey mapping. They're persistent. They stick around as long as you need them, as long as there's real value. They're outcome focused, which means that they're not just focused on activities and deliverables. And this is the big distinction with project management. Project managers, through no fault of their own, but the training and the indoctrination of project managers is make your deliverables on time and on budget. Business results are the problem of the business sponsor. And that is in distinction to a product team where the product owner, in addition to being accountable for activities and deliverables, is also accountable for business results. And that's how they're measured. And so they have greater autonomy, but also greater responsibility. They're collaborative, which means they prefer direct face-to-face interaction, perhaps over Zoom, of course, but that's preferred in contrast to collecting a 500-page requirements document and throwing it over the wall to a development team. They're heterogeneous, they're multi-skilled, they're cross-functional. These are all terms we hear, as opposed to being just a team of specialists. They prefer to produce automated services, automated, digital products, and they prefer to consume digital services from a platform perspective. So there will be a bias there, for example, towards cloud solutions or similarly automated solutions. And they are relatively autonomous. This is not anarchy. They are held accountable through mechanisms such as OKRs, objectives and key results. They make certain promises, and they are expected to keep those promises, and that's how they're measured and governed. But they increasingly are not governed in terms of their strict step-by-step adherence to processes and checklists. That's the older model. There is an overlap, of course, between internal versus external product teams. It's well accepted by now in the industry that a product team can be internally facing. If we were in this conversation 10 years ago, many people would say, well, product teams are for market-facing things. And that would just be the broad default assumption. But over the past 10 years, there's been an increasing realization that product thinking adds a lot of value, even if the product team is not directly exposed to the market. There still is a need for a common core of priorities that roughly mirror the EPOCA priorities: empathy and concern for personas, design thinking, responsibility for outcomes, and so forth. Internal teams are more likely to focus on things like organizational change management, whereas external teams are going to be looking at things like competitor analysis that might be less relevant for an internal team. But all in all, they center on a common core of product-centric thinking, and this is why the product-centric operating model is one of the most popular topics in all of Forrester research right now. So I want to talk a little bit about the impacts on the traditional infrastructure and operations organization, because this is of keen interest to many on the call here, I think. Many of you will be originating from an I&O organization background, because that's where service management is the best known. So we have the concept of I&O, infrastructure and operations. but it's actually a complex concept that operates along two dimensions. Infrastructure implies application, and so it's a stack along the left. Operate implies develop, and so it's a life cycle around the top. And yes, we get a four box. And analysts, yes, we love our four boxes, but this one makes sense. It has explanatory power. For example, we see that this explains why we've often hear the complaint that it takes 3/4 of the IT dollar just to keep the lights on. Well, that's because infrastructure and operations owned both infrastructure engineering as well as support, and in many cases also supported the applications at that level. So that left just 1/4 of the space for the SVP of application development. And this was mirrored in many, many organizations that we've worked with over the years, and it's empirically supported in Forrester data. And in many of your own experience, I'm sure this is not a controversial statement. But what do we see now? We see, for example, that with infrastructure as code, coupled with cloud platform automation, the need for traditional infrastructure engineering is much less. Similarly, and up, look what I did there. It's no longer application development, it's digital product management. Product teams start to encroach on your traditional day two concerns, and then coupled with chatbots and improved search and automation, self-service, we see a narrowing of that need for the traditional day two support at both the infrastructure and the application level. And so we see a rebalancing here between digital product management versus the platforms that support it, the platforms that provide the infrastructure basis, the core services such as compute and network, and then a certain set of services we'll go into later that I will call coordination services. But there are reasonable questions around product teams. This is, I call him skeptical man. Skeptical man represents, for example, the 4 or 5 senior directors of infrastructure and operations who have said to me in the past 6 months alone, Charlie, you speak of cross-functional teams, integrated product teams, and I've also had advocates for agile methods come in and say these same things to me. I must tell you, we will have 60 product teams, but I only have 8 database administrators. And we will not hire 80 or 60, we will not hire another 52 database administrators. We simply don't have the money. And if we put a database administrator on every one of 60 product teams, they would not have enough to do. So how do we solve this problem? And this is one of the, I think, most important problems in digital organizations today as they transform. Some will say, well, we'll just train everybody to know enough database management. But what happens when you're up against that very, very tough indexing problem, that very, very tough database connection pooling problem? And you're looking on Stack Overflow, and no amount of Googling or Stack Overflow gets you the answer you need. And real customer value is at stake, and customers are complaining. That is not a hypothetical situation. It's a very real situation that stems from the fact that when we go completely cross-functional, we start to lose expertise in the enterprise. And some of the most influential advocates of cross-functional work are also very concerned about this. And so this is the problem that we're faced with today, because ultimately, nobody is truly autonomous. This young individual here, perhaps they're out guarding the fields, tending the flocks, chasing away, animals that want to eat the vegetables. Doesn't really matter. They look autonomous, and to a certain extent they are. They are expected to, make their way to the next village or to protect the fields, but somebody gave them that lamp. Somebody gave them the food they have in that basket. Somebody gave them their clothes. Ultimately, nobody is truly autonomous. And this is the reality we have to face as we move to digital and as we move to Agile and DevOps. We're faced with the fact that the DevOps organization needs enterprise shared services. And there are those in the Agile community who have, started to question whether enterprise shared services should be accepted at all. I'm not on their side. I think that enterprise shared services are an essential fact. I think they're a reality. I think we need to make them work. But the idea that every team, can do enough legal and HR and all the rest to meet its needs, I think is fundamentally naive. And yet you will hear agile advocates speak in favor of this. And this is a very active discussion in the industry today. I believe that enterprise shared services support the product team, that the product team needs the specialization, the specialized resources, the specialized knowledge of the enterprise shared services. And the trick to making this work is that the enterprise shared services themselves need to adopt a product approach. So you will notice that there is a little green and yellow figure 8 on every one of those green boxes. Now, does this mean that legal is operating a DevOps tool chain? No, of course not. But it does mean that legal and HR and all the rest are engaged in their own process of experimentation, their own continuous improvement process. And continuous improvement is not a new concept. It goes back to the 40s and 50s. It goes back to the great management thinkers like Deming and Duran. It has been revived in new guises such as Toyota Kata and Lean Startup. But this is a very, very old conversation. And I can tell you that some of the people who are at the ground floor, who are there at the creation of DevOps in particular, were very well aware of the history of continuous improvement and that whole dialogue and narrative. And so what is old, what is new is old, what is old is new. There is nothing new under the sun. But there are new ways of doing it, and there are new priorities and new expressions of the classic concerns. And that's what we are seeing today. As we look at this from a process model perspective, I have devised what I call the new process reference model. It centers on the team, and the team is accountable for their ways of working as well as their work. They use a variety of tools: Scrum, Kanban, case management, checklists, swarming, chat ops. They limit their work in process as appropriate. They are not subject to an external process excellence team coming in and dictating to them, this is the way you will do things. No, they have the autonomy to define their ways of working. That's a critical difference and is very different from some of the previous operating models we've seen. But they are still held accountable to a value stream. They are part of a portfolio. Somebody decided to take a chance and fund them. There was a funding authority that preceded the team. That has to be the case. And I think in some times, some of my agile colleagues are a little naive about this. Somebody made the business decision to charter the team. How does that happen? They, of course, rely on a broad variety of platform services that I think are self-explanatory along the bottom. But what's less obvious is that they also need a set of coordination services that look a lot like the previous world of ITSM: service catalog, change and release management, incident management, knowledge management, the venerable NOC and the service desk. These don't go away. I've talked to organizations that tried to do without a NOC. It did not end well. They wound up with a lot of finger pointing. You have to have some capability that is fundamentally concerned with the overall integrity of your enterprise as a system and is concerned with the fundamentals of the overall customer experience. And without the service desk, you wind up with your expensive tier 3 engineers handling a lot of day-to-day tier 1 churn questions. How do I use your service? It's broken. Well, no, it's not really broken. You just misconfigured it. All of these things emerge and they never go away. And so companies that come in with a strong dogmatic, we're going to build it and run it, very quickly realize that that simply doesn't scale, and it doesn't scale across complex organizations that are composed of meshes of microservices and teams of teams. And then there's the simple question: you stand up a new service as some, kind of a cross-functional micro enterprise team. How do people even know you exist? How do you market yourself? You need a service catalog to do this, and service catalogs are getting a lot of traction lately in some very surprising, cutting edge, next generation circles. So it's very interesting, kind of revival of this topic. It's no longer seen as old school. Some of the most cutting edge discussions of the new platform economy discuss the need for a service catalog, this old ITIL version 2 concept, which is now new again. Again, the old is new and the new is old. One of the most important kinds of service that we see is the concept of a platform team. The platform team is your revitalized infrastructure organization, your revitalized infrastructure team. Compute, network, and so on and so forth. They're there so that organizations or product teams with a more customer focus don't have to worry about this lower level stuff around the platforms and how we provision and secure and monitor them. And monitoring is a great example of what I would expect a platform team to do. We really don't want 60 product teams or 50 product teams all deciding on their own monitoring tools and strategies. That makes no sense whatsoever. It needs to be centralized. It needs to be a common shared service. But it's not a common shared service that any customer is going to interact with. And so it's invisible to the customer. It's operating at an infrastructure level. It hasn't gone away because of Agile or DevOps. We now call it a platform team. But here's the key problem. Transforming an infrastructure team into a platform team is not a simple matter. You are tasked or challenged with new ways of working, ways of thinking, new cultural priorities. You can't just take 6 or 8 systems administrators or database administrators, who've been sitting there taking tickets and getting work done that way and say, surprise, you're now a platform team. Nothing will change. You now need a greater entrepreneurial, business within a business orientation. You need customer focus. You need greater levels of automation. You need to start challenging that team to continuously improve, again, as a small business within a business. The team has to be willing and confront the reality that maybe some of what they do needs to be outsourced. You're no longer racking and stacking servers. We're going to outsource that to Amazon or Microsoft. But guess what? You still got a job now as the cloud platform enablement team, because we have to define what services we're going to use from Amazon and what the best practices are for using them. And so it's not a simple topic, but there is plenty of work there to be done. And if we don't do the work in the right way, we are going to wind up with this gentleman's look of horror. And this is why the Agile zealots, I will call them, the strong Agile and Scrum advocates, will come in and they will tell your organization shared services are a blocker. Shared services are a problem. You shouldn't use shared services because they slow the teams down too much. And this is a reality that anybody operating at the infrastructure platform level has got to deal with. And this has to be fixed. I want to inject a note of urgency in the conversation, because this is what leads people to just go off and directly engage with Amazon or Microsoft or Google, because they're tired of waiting too long. They're tired of the default service model. First come, first serve, mediated by who screams loudest. Take a ticket, sit down, shut up, wait your turn, unless you have your boss yell at me. That is how we have delivered services in hundreds and thousands of large organizations around the world. And it's time for this model to come to an end, because it just takes too long to give people the valuable things that they legitimately need to serve and delight the customer. And organizations that are breaking through this problem are serving and delighting their customer faster than you are, and they are going to already have started taking away your customer market share. We can no longer accept this situation of affairs. How do we solve it? We solve it with the realization that a service manager is a product owner. And it's taken me this entire presentation to get to this point. Because if I'd started with these words, you might have looked at them and say, well, what does this even mean? But now we've talked about product ownership and what a product owner needs to do. And we've talked about the problems of service management and the old model that we're breaking away from. And so now I can say to you, a service manager is a product owner, and this is the way forward. We look at a wide variety of concerns and options that the modern service manager has, and this is going to take a little time. It does start with ticketing in the middle, and ticketing leads to routine work, and there's always going to be a need for this. There's always going to be a need for this workflow-centric core. Give me a new cell phone, give me a new desktop computer, give me the new Excel Power Pack, specialized analytic toolkit that didn't come with the default installation of Microsoft 365. I'm not in an urgent need for it. Ticketing works fine for that. And it is also the default gateway into more complex work. But the problem there is that when ticketing is applied to more complex work, then we start to see delay emerging, and that's a problem. How do we respond when people say, I need a consultation with a database administrator, or I need a database administrator to do some complex work for me, and it's just taking too long? Well, we've got a number of responses. We can start to automate. Is there some way that this problem has been solved before, that your problem has been addressed through the creation of perhaps reusable design patterns that then inform how we want to actually stand up the database to begin with via an automated API? If it's more of a personal issue, maybe a chatbot. So we can take some of the load off of the operators handling the routine work, and we do that through chat and AI. And so you can interact with a chatbot. I personally interacted with the Apple chatbot last night on a personal matter having to do with my MacBook Air, and it was quite capable. I didn't feel that it was a low value exercise. I had the concerns, of course, when I first called. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get the chatbot. But the chatbot, and it was a voice operated chatbot, it wasn't any worse than a human being. It got me what I needed quite quickly. And there's more and more stories like this, of course, across the industry. We also might see that it's important to move into the high touch area. And this is where so many shared services teams also fall down, because they don't act as a business within a business. They don't understand that they have to they have to engage in relationship management. They also are in the business of cultivating an ecosystem of users. This is the T-shaped idea, that you want your users to become more familiar with your products so they aren't calling you every day. They don't need routine support because you've given them the education they need, perhaps through sponsoring a community of practice, or what in the Spotify model is called a guild. And then in some cases, if you're operating your shared service as a business, you might have a consulting bench and you assign people with the right expertise to the problem. Or in some cases, you have enough of a business perspective that you look at the demand a given customer has and you say, you should hire your own permanent person, and we'll keep them aligned with our standards and best practices through the community of practice. But we're going to recommend that somebody be permanently assigned to you, and that they will actually report to you and be paid by your area, because you are a payments team, for example, and you need a security specialist. You have a legitimate need there. You've got a data-centric problem, and yeah, we only have 8 DBAs, but we're going to recommend you hire your own 9th DBA, and that's perfectly appropriate. We don't feel that we've let you down because you have such needs for permanent ongoing service there. The service owner, as a product manager, thinks about all these things. And I could go much deeper on every single one of these icons, and I will be doing so in my future research. But today we have limited time, so I'm going to move on. As a service owner, you have two cues, two ways that you recognize work. You have your business as usual work, your security approvals that you do on a day-to-day basis. But then as a business owner, you're also constantly soliciting, how can I improve? And again, that continuous improvement theme, I've mentioned that a few slides ago, but it's work. And you have to think about how you're going to fund this work, how it's going to figure into your ongoing portfolio of investments as a service owner. So the suggestion box, and then how you're going to pay for the best suggestions as to how you can be a better service. And then as a business within a business owner of a service, you think about both these things. You think about continuous improvement. Again, I'm repeating myself. I love Toyota Kata, though. It's a great um, new expression of old ideas, the idea that you understand where you want to be. You understand very firmly and in a very detailed, hands-on way where you are. You don't just sit in your corner office behind your big desk and look at emails and read reports. You get out on the shop floor, wherever the shop floor may be, and it may be amongst your knowledge workers, so it doesn't involve an assembly line. But either way, you grasp the current condition. You look at where the work is taking place, and you have the detailed conversations. And through the application of the first two, you decide where you want to be. And it's a stretch goal. If you're into OKRs, you understand the stretch goal, you only have a 70% likelihood of getting there, but you push hard for it, just like you push hard in training. If you're doing weight training, you push to the point of failure. And then you continuously iterate and figure out how you're going to get there. And that's a process of experimentation that can never be standardized at the low level because the conditions are always different. Most important, you look at information. You look at the question of, well, for example, if I'm managing a portfolio of workflows, a portfolio of services, where are things spiking? Where are the high Q states? Where are customers likely to be unhappy because the average days of delivery are going up? This is not a good trend. We've got demand spiking. We haven't got enough resources. And the challenge has been for the traditional service model, we've not had this data all in one place. And now with enterprise service management, we do. And this is super exciting. This data has not been available. It has been siloed in shadow systems and in siloed workflow systems, enterprise groupware, shared email boxes, all the ways that enterprise shared services have been previously accessed. And now there's a growing consensus. No, we need to have this in common systems with common inputs, common ways of accessing, common ways of identifying how long the work took. And then we can start to figure out what product owners are really struggling, what product owners need more resources. And the product owners are in an apples to apples conversation and can benchmark against each other. And so as a service owner, you watch this kind of data. You watch for the low net promoter score because your queues are spiking and it's taking 6 to 10 to 20 days to get your services executed and delivered out. And then you start to apply lean concepts like making work visible, redefining your processes, all the rest of the things I'm mentioning here. There's a wide variety of techniques you can execute within the bounds of the triangle, or you can left shift into greater standard. And here the things are switched around here. So sorry, but you can shift into greater levels of automation. You can shift into higher touch responses. Any of these, you can do both, but any of these imply that you need some investment. And if the investment is not forthcoming as a service owner, you then need to be honest with your leadership that you have accepted the cost and risk of delay. The service will remain slow, it will remain unresponsive, but without investment in it, we are accepting the costs and risks of that. And so, as a service owner, you now start to have a much more business focused conversation. And so, ultimately, I see, as I look at the industry trends, I see a broad and increasing level of interest in entrepreneurship and business within a business in small cross-functional, relatively autonomous teams that are challenged more and more to operate at a business level, not just at a technical level. We have new applications of AI and machine learning that are coming online that are going to help us understand and provide better analytic services for the challenges that these service owners are faced with. We are also getting better understanding into the realities of day-to-day work in the enterprise beyond the formalized organizational charts and process models that say how things should be. We're getting better and better understanding through techniques like applied process mining as to how things actually are. And I think that vendors such as Manage Engine are very well placed to provide increasingly critical services as we move into this new, more micro entrepreneurial world of shared services. The platform offerings that a Manage Engine provides in being able to market and present the various services are so important as we're moving forward into this new world to track the customer satisfaction, to understand how work is really flowing. Enterprise service management is absolutely very well and centrally positioned to play an important role as we move on to the new digital economy. And with that, I want to thank my hosts very much at Manage Engine. Hopefully, this all came out across well. And with that, I want to turn it back over to my hosts and for any final words if necessary.
Thank you, Charles, for that insightful session. Is it possible to get a copy of the presentation? We will respond to all of these questions. If you have anything further to ask us, please drop us an email at hello@servicedeskplus.com and we'll get back to you. Thank you all so much for taking part in this webinar. We hope you enjoyed this session and we do look forward to having you on similar events in future. Thank you, Charles, again for being here today and sharing your thoughts with us. Um, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for participating.
Yep.
We'll see you all soon again.
Yep. You're
Bye
welcome.
and stay safe.
Bye.